Ooh, another white boy with a podcast. Pronouns, Jim Bro. Another white boy with a podcast. You want to see the video? It went viral.
Hi Gains Gurus, and welcome to TMGP, the Muscle Growth Podcast, episode 10. I am your host, Roscoe, and today we're welcoming Dr. Pak onto the show. He fell in love with resistance training when he was 16 years old, and it changed his life. His passion for training and nutrition kept growing since then, eventually leading him to pursue a career as an educator and researcher in sports science. He developed a passion for coaching during the first years of his academic career, where he helped fellow lifters and friends with their strength training and nutrition. Discovering his love for coaching, he began working with competitive powerlifters, recreationally active individuals, and athletes to gain experience and further develop his skill set. He believes that a genuinely evidence-based approach to training and nutrition should be guided by the current available scientific evidence as well as professional experience, while factoring in individual preferences and idiosyncrasies. As a coach, his aim is to create a collaborative atmosphere based on the consolidation of his experience and the client's feedback, which in turn will generate an adaptive plan of action that best suits the client's goals. Pak did his PhD in sports science at Solent University, UK, on the topic of the minimum effective training dose for strength in powerlifters. His research focuses on muscle strength, hypertrophy, and strength sport performance. Pak has worked for over 5 years with physique athletes, powerlifters, and recreationally active individuals looking to get stronger and improve their body composition. Pak has also done an amazing 13 years in the gym, training and lifting. Given that brief glimpse into Dr. Pak's remarkable background, let's jump right into the show. Hi, Pak.
Hello, Roscoe. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. And yourself?
I'm fine. Another day here in tropical Southampton, United Kingdom.
Fantastic. Can you please give me a brief introduction to yourself and what you do?
Sure. My name is Pak. Actually, that's my nickname. My actual name is Patroklos Androulakis Krakakis. I was blessed to have both surnames from both my mother's and father's side. I am a researcher / educator in all things lifting, and more specifically in exercise science as it pertains to muscle growth and strength. And yeah, I publish research, make videos, write articles, all sorts of educational stuff related to lifting for lifters, for people that like going to the gym, getting jacked, getting strong, and just enjoy the iron.
And you lift.
And I lift as well. I'm not sure if I can demonstrate, if I have the appropriate citations here. I do some recreational lifting myself, and I've been lifting for I think it's 11, 12, actually it's 13 years now. So yeah, lifting has been one of the best things that have happened in my life, and I want to get more people to lift and help people who already lift, do things differently.
So what got you into lifting and research in the first place? What perked your interest?
So I was always somebody who enjoyed geeking out about things. I was heavily into computers when I was a kid. And that, as part of learning about being self-taught and learning about, how to program, how to hack, how to do all sorts of stuff, I got used to searching for things myself. So when I got into lifting and I saw that, I actually like this lifting thing, it was, it was natural for me to be like, okay, how do I do this better? Or what's the best, whatever program to follow, as we would say back in the day, or what should I eat in order to maximize growth? And yeah, from a research standpoint, that essentially started when I did my undergraduate degree, and I met some of my mentors, James Steele and James Fisher, who got me into research. But while learning about what makes a good program, or what's the best way to eat for lifting, I noticed that, hey, the science is actually where we need to look for, not the majority of the answers, but at least for a base for most answers. And when I saw that, as somebody who likes searching for stuff, I was like, maybe I could do that at some point, either as a hobby or for a living.
and you made it your living.
It's a hobby, believe it or not. Like, it is my living in the sense that it is indirectly feeding into my living, as in like the content and the coaching, but like research itself, like the research projects that you see us putting out there, it's that's mostly like from a financial perspective on the hobby side. As far as
Yeah.
output, yeah, it seems like we're making a living out of it.
So the research is for fun, like that's what you do for fun almost, as well as for academia.
It's because of my personal interest. But if I was to say today, look, no more research projects this year, my net income would not change. It's not that I am
Right.
contracted to do research. So it is something that I do because I enjoy it and it gives me a greater purpose. So that for me is more important than the financial aspect of it. But I don't, there's always the possibility that at some point in the future I may be in academia, but not yet.
Absolutely. So how was the change or the conversion from computer hacking to, I guess, hacking muscle growth? Was it quite an easy one or completely different, or how did it go for you?
It was completely different in the sense that obviously completely different fields, but a lot of the skills that I learned while, learning about computers, I was then like, they transferred really well to everything else. So being able to search for stuff and being very persistent with searching is something that transferred greatly to the research side of things. Additionally, um, a lot of skills that have to do with being comfortable around computers and technology also came in handy. Now, I wouldn't say there was a direct transfer, obviously, because you don't learn about physiology or the literature on muscle growth when you're dealing with computer science, but it definitely made certain things easier, or at least less intimidating when doing a degree, when dealing with software and so on and so forth.
So did you actually study computer science?
No, I was full on self-taught.
Okay, cool. And then what were your exact degrees? Sorry.
My exact degree, so the first one was fitness and personal training. So it was a bachelor's of science in fitness and personal training, which is, I think Eric Helms has done something similar, which was essentially like sports science plus a practical element to it. And then I published a few studies and went directly into a PhD. My PhD was on the minimum dose for strength for powerlifters. And yeah, those are my two degrees essentially.
Well, since you mentioned the minimum dose for strength, is that the paper with regards to increasing your one rep max? Is that correct?
Yeah, there are a few papers that came off the back of my PhD, and there's one systematic review, which was essentially the literature review of the PhD. There is a paper that was a pilot study, and then there's a multi-experiment paper where we looked at, and I think that's the one you've read as well, where there's like 5 different studies as part of one single paper, looking specifically at powerlifters.
Which one do you think would be best to give a high overview of? Maybe the one that's got the 5, because that will be all inclusive.
Yeah, I mean, the literature review essentially showed that in trained men doing, 2 to 3 sets at like 8 to 12 repetitions per exercise per week was enough to lead to significant strength increases in squat and bench press strength in trained individuals. So that's the gist of that. When it comes to the big paper where we interviewed powerlifters, we interviewed coaches, we did studies, and in general, we had a more holistic view on powerlifters specifically, because before that paper, there was not really much much literature directly looking at powerlifting and the concept of the minimum dose. What we found was that powerlifting athletes that look to incorporate a minimum effective training dose approach can do so by doing approximately 3 to 6 working sets of 1 to 5 repetitions each week, with these sets spread across 1 to 3 sessions per week per lift, so per squat, deadlift, and so on and so forth, at loads somewhere above 80% 1RM, or at an RPE of, let's say, 7.5 to 9.5. And they if they do that for 6 to 12 weeks, they should expect to gain strength. But interestingly, we also found that if you want to spend even less time at the gym, even as little as a few singles per week, so like 1 to 3 singles per lift, may still get you some gains, although the likelihood of those gains being meaningful is much lower than if you were to do a few more sets.
Very interesting. And you mentioned that squat and bench was used. Was deadlift, were there deadlift parameters as well, or was that ignored for the purpose of these studies?
So for the studies, yeah, of course we did all three lifts, but for the literature review, there were no studies available online that had looked at the deadlift in the concept of the minimum effective dose. So we couldn't really look at the deadlift because there was nothing to look at. But then we did our studies and we obviously included the deadlift in order to fill that gap and, make things a bit more clear as far as powerlifting strength goes.
And was it similar for the squat, bench, and deadlift in that study?
Yeah, so when we actually took a bunch of powerlifters and had them follow different protocols, all three lifts seemed to benefit, maybe not perfectly equally, but they all seem to respond similarly to the different protocols. It's important to know that the deadlift, because of how we structured the program that the participants followed, the deadlift did have the least volume out of the three lifts. So it was like bench was first in terms of volume, then squat, then deadlift. And that was just simply because that's how you see things done on average in the field. Again, this was just an observation. But yeah, overall, it's the guidance, the guidelines that I presented should work just fine for any of the three lifts.
And you mentioned RPE, and I think I might be mistaken, but you guys did a finding with some kind of study where you measured different kinds of, monitoring how close to failure you're going. Whether I think it was to do with the percentage of 1 rep max. One of them was way better than RPE or RIR. What were the findings of that study, and what was the study called?
Are you talking about the accuracy in predicting repetitions on reserve? Yeah, so
I think so.
Yeah, so this study was called Accuracy in Predicting Repetitions to Task Failure in Resistance Exercise, a scoping review and exploratory meta-analysis, which was led by Israel Halperin, and we had the chance to help out as well. And by we, I mean myself and Milo Wolf. This was a project that was led by Israel and was also sort of co-spearheaded by James Steele. And we essentially found that although participants were imperfect, so we looked at how good are people at guessing repetitions in reserve. Now, we looked specifically at acute designs, or mostly acute designs. So what we found was that participants were imperfect in their ability to predict failure, independent of their training background. But the fact that they were imperfect was not that extreme in terms of practical meaningfulness, because they were just off by about a repetition. So they were just either under or over 1 repetition. And we saw that as you did, for those that lifted heavier weights and did less reps, prediction accuracy was better. And as repetitions increased in a set, prediction accuracy was impacted somewhat negatively. But overall, the findings of this, and obviously terms of this apply, where that for trained individuals and untrained individuals, predicting repetitions in reserve may be more straightforward than sometimes people make it out to be, although terms of conditions apply.
Well, as always. So the next one I'd like to go into is a really, really cool study, which is optimizing resistance training technique to maximize muscle hypertrophy, a narrative review. I think, is that your most recent publication?
Yeah, so that was a publication that came out, I think it was a month ago. It was published on the 29th of December, and we essentially wanted to lay a base for future research on technique and its effect on hypertrophy. As it stands, there's not really much data on the effect of exercise technique on hypertrophy, and we wanted to, again, lay that foundation so we can do future research and we chose a narrative review, which sits relatively low at the hierarchy of scientific evidence. It's not like as a systematic review, which sits quite at the top, because it's essentially our take of the literature, and that's it. Like, there's no systematic search, but because there's no currently there are no studies directly examining the concept of exercise technique, we couldn't really do much more than just a narrative review. So we looked at the current literature, attempted to provide a definition for what exercise technique means, and essentially looked at the components of exercise technique and how one should manipulate those in order to maximize hypertrophy.
And what were the findings?
So keep in mind that, again, this was meant to be like a base for future research. So it's not like we did original research or a systematic review, and these findings are the end all be all. Not that they would be even if we had done a systematic review, but overall, like, as long as you're biasing long muscle length, so as long as you're employing a range of motion that allows you to get a full stretch on a muscle, and you are spending about 2 to 8 seconds per repetition with whatever eccentric or concentric duration you choose, as long as you stay within that range, you are most likely ticking a lot, if not all, boxes as far as technique goes. Now, when it comes to body alignment, body positioning, and movement patterns, those there's no direct research on, specifically manipulating different exercises and, the changing, let's say, slightly how wide you grip a bar or where exactly you grip a handle or whatever. We don't have any research showing whether changes that are often presented as game-changing for hypertrophy, whether those actually make a difference. That doesn't mean that they don't make a difference, but we don't know at the moment, and the idea that they are, that they are game-changing, that idea is not really based on much. So as long as you take the quote-unquote textbook form for any given exercise, let's say a lat pull down, where you're told to grab on the bar, bring it all the way down, bring it all the way up, avoid swinging heavily. As long as you take that form and you modify it to the range of motion and tempo recommendations presented in the narrative review, you're likely maximizing hypertrophy, obviously assuming that you're taking sets close to failure.
Absolutely. And on that long length muscle, the partials, for something like a biarticulative muscle, what side matters? Like for the hamstring, for example, where would it be considered stretched? Would it be at both? Like how do you decide for something that's biarticulate like that, a muscle?
So keep in mind that we didn't necessarily specifically say for people to do like partials, but rather to make sure that whenever they perform an exercise, the muscle they're trying to target is fully stretched. But keep in mind, there's again a lot of like asterisks and caveats on that. So I'd say that the way to conceptualize this is if you're sitting on a machine on a leg curl and you are able to slightly change your position so that you can have your knee fully flexed and your hamstring fully stretched, then that should be your go-to. You shouldn't necessarily go out of your way to get in a position that feels uncomfortable, or think about it much more than just, okay, make sure that I'm getting a nice stretch on whatever I'm doing. For example, on a Romanian deadlift, make sure that you are getting a deep stretch versus adding 7 plates and being on a 7-plate deficit, because we don't really know whether that will make even more of a difference. You could do it based, again, on the findings of this review. You could do it in an attempt to absolutely maximize adaptations or make an educated bet as far as making more gains goes. But I would urge people to not get into this paralysis by analysis mindset where they're now having to overthink whether their muscle is actually fully stretched or not. Like when you're doing a bicep curl, all we're saying is make sure that your elbow is fully extended and that you are not like stopping shy of having that bicep sort of fully stretched. But you don't necessarily need to think past that. And that's why I'm giving you more of a practical takeaway sort of response to the question.
So something like a Bayesian behind the back curl, bicep curl would be perfect for bicep, or perfect in inverted commas for getting that stretch position.
Yeah, but again, that depends, like, because we didn't specifically touch on exercise selection. We said that within
Right.
whatever exercise you're doing, make sure that during that exercise that you are biasing long muscling. So whether you choose an exercise that um, allows you to get even more length
Mm,
was slightly outside the scope of this review, if
sure.
that makes sense. So, but yeah, yeah, that would be a great exercise. However, again, in this, like, in the whole discussion of optimizing exercise selection, I do think that as long as you're performing 2 to 3 exercises per muscle group, it is very unlikely that you're missing out on gains, even if those exercises are not the best.
Optimal.
Yeah, and like optimal, keep in mind, is theoretical. Like, we don't have
Yeah.
theoretical for some exercises. Like, we do have data on, for example, seated and so bent.
Lying.
Yeah, no, yeah, seated and lying leg curls, but also bent and straight leg calf raises. And the straight leg calf raises seem to actually be like, yeah, like much better. And with the bent knee, there's more data coming out on that soon. Um, but yeah,
Exciting.
overall, like, it's unlikely you're missing out on a lot of gains for your biceps if you're doing some form of curl and you're also doing a bunch of back work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it would be a really cool and really a deep study to do, one where you take different exercises for different muscle groups and try and figure out what yields the best results overall, to try and aim for that optimized kind of training program. Would you think something like that would be possible?
In what sense? Could you elaborate a bit?
Sure. So, for example, you take chess, for example, and then you do, maybe you look at different programs online, and then based on these programs, you then try and use educated guessing to see where you can like get good stretch positions. For example, maybe with the cambered bar for bench is a really good one. And then versus a regular bar for bench versus chest press, flies, those kind of things. And then you basically take the group of exercises, and you have athletes or trained athletes maybe do different ones and see which ones can elicit the best results overall on average.
Yeah, in an imaginary world where we were able to do, like, ideally we would, like, if I had millions, I would pour a lot of my own money back into research. And research, obviously, like, keep in mind everything that we're discussing here in the grand scheme of things, and like public health and so on and so forth. These are not even minor details. These are like things that are not important whatsoever. Like, maximizing muscle hypertrophy is, especially in the context that we're talking about, is literally for those who care to do it just for the sake of doing it to an extent, right? Keep in mind that understanding how muscles grow and whether long musclings play a role, that's a different story. But then specifically taking like different variations of exercise and testing them, that would be really cool. But I fear, not fear, I feel that, unless we had a huge sample of people that we could look at for long periods of time, we wouldn't really detect any meaningful differences, especially especially when it comes to especially when it comes to 8 to 12 weeks of muscle growth.
Sure.
You feel
I
me?
get you.
But
I get you.
sorry, again, like, if you're somebody who wants to geek out over building muscle and like the gym is your hobby, yeah, now that we were seeing that the stretch is important, yeah, playing around with that specialty bar or adjusting your push-ups so you can get a bit more of a stretch can be fun, and it can come with a nice, placebo dose of, oh, I'm getting more out of this. Are you getting
Yeah.
much more in reality? I don't think so. Does it make for a fun training, and can it make you feel that like your training is more effective and allow you to stick to training more? Sure. And I do it as well. Like, I like to adjust things so I can get a nicer stretch. But in my head, the few times where I don't have access to my usual chest press and I'm on this sort of like shitty chest press where I cannot get a really, really proper stretch, am I worried that I'm missing out on gains? No, not at all. I just take that set to failure, and like that's that.
You're happy. Yeah. It's interesting. Didn't Milo mention that there was 5 to 10 increase with using long length partials versus full range of motion?
Yeah. So, and that's something that a lot of people miss out on. We do have the data does indicate that partials at long muscle lengths may indeed be superior to just a full range of motion for reasons that we don't fully understand yet. And again, in the context of absolutely making every possible educated bet to maximize muscle growth, yeah, I would include partials at long muscle lengths. And I personally do partials at long muscle lengths for some exercises. But we are still figuring things out. And at the same time, context is important. So, yes, you may be able to eke out a bit more growth, and that's also something that is difficult to measure, because how do you know like that you're actually growing more from whatever you may be doing? Because I've seen people say, oh, I tried this and I'm seeing results, and it's like,
Yeah.
are you really seeing results in just a couple of months? But
Or placebo.
no, it's not placebo. It's that time is passing as well. You're still engaging in
Sure.
training. Is it that you did this one thing differently, or that it's been another 3-4 months of
Natural progression.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, people are somewhat losing their, like Milo has been pretty clear about what the literature shows, and the literature does indicate that there is indeed something to working at long muscle lengths, and there's more research needed, as we said on the paper as well, which Milo is an author on. But in the context of maximizing muscle growth, I would say you'd be a fool to not include some lengthened
Range of
partials.
motion.
No, some lengthened partials in there. Full range of motion, sure, but we're seeing consistently that short range is not really really doing that much. Obviously, I'm not saying do every exercise as lengthened partials. Keep things at full ROM as well, but avoiding lengthened partials completely. If you're the guy, yeah, it may be a bit silly. If you're the guy that is like on it with everything else, because you see people doing other things that are far more speculative than lengthened partials, and trying other exercise techniques and prioritizing, how a muscle feels or the pump or this and that or the other, and then choose to ignore lengthened partials because the literature is not 100% conclusive yet. Sure, it's not. But worst case scenario, based on the evidence that we currently have, you're not going to miss out on growth, and if anything, you may actually get a bit more growth that you weren't getting before for reasons that we don't fully understand just yet.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And it's good to have that balance of what like the full range, and then adding in some long length partials. I remember reading about the training exercise technique, and the most important thing that I found from the study was basically putting your muscles in such a way to target the muscle as well as prevent a risk of injury.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the best kind of like overall technique advice we can give? Try and maybe stabilize the muscle to focus on that specific muscle, as well as control the weight. Is that more or less the guideline there?
Yeah. So the issue with safety and preventing injury when lifting is that we don't have a lot of direct evidence on what really impacts injury. And if we look at sports like bodybuilding and powerlifting, injury rates, especially in bodybuilding, are very low compared to other sports. And people are doing all sorts of stuff when bodybuilding, and including, a lot of volume and, putting their bodies through different planes of motion. But I digress. When it comes to exercise technique, it's, in my opinion, and take this with a grain of salt, I think that one should have, and it's different for hypertrophy and strength, right? When you talk about strength, you need to become as efficient as possible at moving the weight from point A to point B, while doing so without pain and while feeling strong. So the way a deadlift may not, if a deadlift doesn't look as aesthetically pleasing, but allows you to get the weight from point A to point B quicker. For strength, that's correct technique, assuming there's no pain, blah, blah, blah. But overall, doing things in a consistent manner and having an exercise technique for hypertrophy that allows you to get a nice stretch and to obviously uh, lift consistently in a similar manner without pain or discomfort is the way to go. Now, that may look slightly different for you than for me because of how we're built. Like your squat may look a bit more upright than mine or vice versa. But I don't think that one is inherently worse for injury, assuming that, again, you're managing load appropriately. You're not randomly lifting with a different technique from one day to the other, and you're attempting all-time PRs with a rounded back, although you've never lifted with a rounded back before. But if you're consistent and there's no pain and discomfort, I don't see why any lifting technique is inherently um, more danger. Maybe not any. I don't see why like any might be a bit extreme, but I think like you can get away with much more than people think. And like for example, do you watch rugby?
Every now and again.
Like just to throw in a silly anecdote, like you see players like rugby players do all sorts of weird movements, bend, get up, get hit while moving, while jumping, fall, change direction, and you see athletes in other sports like combat sports where they do all sorts of crazy workouts on top of a lot of cardio, on top of boxing, on top of getting hit, and they're still not breaking in half. So the idea that you doing a squat in a controlled manner where you're like there, not moving, not being pushed randomly when you least expect it from a different angle, and you're slowly adding weight while feeling comfortable, stable, and there's no pain. You're attempting another rep just because your upper back slightly rounded on that last rep because I don't know, because it was tired, because you had already done a few reps. I don't think that it may look ugly, it may look like something is wrong, but I don't know. I don't think we have any evidence to say that it is that bad.
Sure. And I totally agree with you. Like it's in a controlled environment. And like you mentioned, like other sports and athletes are getting hit from all kinds of sides at any time, and they're not breaking, like you mentioned. I mean, I think that's an important thing that I try to like drive home is that we're not fragile. Well, we shouldn't be. We're trying not to be. So like deadlifting, squatting, bench pressing, like try, like you're built to like move, and to, if you want to be strong, then you can be strong.
Exactly. And the idea that being in the gym and getting your bones and muscles stronger is making you more fragile, like that's so
crazy.
Yeah, that's so antithetical to me, where I'm like, I don't know, I don't get it, but hey ho.
Yeah, a lot of doctors and physio, well, maybe not physios, but a lot of doctors are so against lifting, and chiropractors, and a lot of people. I'm just like, that's why I quite like those doctors and things who lift. I think there's even an Instagram page like that.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah. But anyway, back to the concentric and eccentric portion of the lift. You mentioned that 2 to 8 second tempo is good. You can't tell whether increasing concentric or increasing eccentric makes much difference, as long as it's between 2 and 8 seconds. With regards to that, sometimes I don't do it anymore because I've started using constant tension. But does that imply constant tension is used in these studies? Because there's no mention of a rest at the bottom or the top of a rep.
Yeah, so the idea of constant tension was a bit of a weird one, because if you are going to failure or very close to failure, you are recruiting all the different fibers that you want to recruit. But trying to slow things down to with the thinking that this allows the muscle to be in constant tension, the force there may actually be lower, therefore recruiting less fibers, when in reality, if you're taking that set to failure, you just reach the same point just faster.
But later. Okay, well, faster if you're doing constant tension.
No,
theoretically.
No, not really, because it will take you longer if you're just like really slowly lifting until you get to the point of like failure that may take less time than using a heavier weight and going, okay, up, down, up, down. Okay, now I'm struggling. Everything is recruited. Muscle cannot produce force anymore. The end. Does that make sense?
Sure. So I kind of meant like, for example, yesterday I was doing bicep curls and I was going quite heavy and I wasn't able to maintain constant, or what we're calling constant tension with regards to, for example, on the way down, I was almost stopping to like get energy to go back up again. Is that, would you say, not the right way to do it? Or do you think because maybe stopping and then getting energy to go back up allowed me to recruit more more muscle fibers because of the rest that they thereby allowed me to maybe push myself 1 or 2 extra reps?
So I don't think that it makes any difference, especially if you're going to momentary failure to the point where you're actually not able to complete another rep. The fact that you rested a bit more, got a couple more reps in, I think if anything that may actually lead to a bit more growth in theory than having stopped a bit earlier. So the idea of constant tension is it makes some sense intuitively because you're thinking, oh, the muscle is constantly getting some stimulus, but if you're going close to failure or to failure, you are taking those boxes regardless.
Okay, so you think it more or less not advantageous one way or other. Maybe would your recommendation be to do a little bit of both, just because we're not sure on which one might be better, or it doesn't really matter? Do what suits you really, as long as you're going to failure.
Yeah,
Close within your RIR.
We have a hint though, because if there was a case for going much slower and seeing greater hypertrophy, we would see that in the literature. But as it stands, super slow reps actually may lead to a bit less growth. So if the idea of constant tension was actually based, had some actual base, then we would be seeing that in the literature, and it would definitely be clear that slower tempos lead to greater hypertrophy. But in reality, do whatever tempo you like. If you want to optimize muscle growth, stay within 2 to 8 seconds per repetition, and whether you do it a bit slower on the eccentric or the concentric is totally up to you. The great equalizer will be going to failure. So whether you do those few reps a bit slower is not really a big deal.
Sure. I noticed that one of the few direct studies on the topic of different exercise specific techniques was on calves. Basically, I think if you point your toes inward or outward, depending your calf muscles would grow differently. I think is that correct? And how would you use that information for other muscles?
So this is what we discussed in the paper is that at the moment there's like not really much in terms of like manipulating body alignment and body positioning to elicit different hypertrophy responses, but that there is one study, there's actually maybe 2 studies, but there's one specifically on the calves called different foot positioning during calf training to induce portion specific gastrocnemius muscle hypertrophy. But again, in the reality of things, we don't really know how that would work on other muscle groups. Now, what they did there is that they had conditions. They had a few conditions. One where the foot was pointed outward, one where the foot was pointed inward, and one where the foot was pointed forward. And they noticed different hypertrophy responses to different parts of the gastrocnemius heads versus the different foot positioning. So the foot pointed outward potentiated the increases in muscle thickness of the medial gastrocnemius head, where the foot pointed inwards provided greater gains for the lateral gastrocnemius head. Now, the author said that the results suggest that head-specific muscle hypertrophy may be obtained selectively for the gastrocnemius after 9 weeks of calf training, but like we could take those results and really extrapolate on, let's say, the lats or the biceps. There may be something to it, but obviously, like, keep in mind, this is one study, and we have to also take in consideration the the potential limitations of the study. So I wouldn't necessarily try and extrapolate from this study to other muscle groups as it stands. So I would say, again, if you're performing any exercise as you've seen on YouTube, and you're going to failure, and you're biasing long muscle lengths, and your tempo is within 2 to 8 seconds, and you're somewhat controlling the eccentric, you're most likely covered as far as the majority, if not all, of your muscle gains go.
That's good. I'm doing that, and that's simple and easy to put into practice. Just a last note on that particular paper before we quickly jump into the throwing cold water on cold water immersion, that paper. Can you quickly just give your definition of strict technique?
So yeah, my definition would be strict technique is the technique that allows you to target the musculature that you're trying to target without unnecessarily involving other muscle groups. Whereas lenient technique would be technique that does target the intended muscle group, but also involves other muscle groups, and something along those lines. That it needs a bit of thinking.
That's pretty much exactly what's written in the paper. So
Nice,
perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for. And then, okay, let's jump into the throwing cold water on muscle growth. That systematic review with meta-analyses of the effects of post-exercise cold water immersion on resistance training induced hypertrophy.
Yeah.
So this one's a big one on TikTok and Instagram and all social media, where a lot of bodybuilders and athletes and whatnot, they say that the reason they get so big, or one of them at least, is that they do ice baths and swim in the ocean and things. And I think from this review and logic, I guess we can extrapolate that might not be the case, especially with related to muscle growth, at least.
Yeah. So this is a meta review with meta-analysis by Alec Pinero. Shout out to Alec, and shout out to the rest of the team from the lab over at NYC, that essentially looked at the effect of post-exercise, specifically post-exercise cold water immersion on resistance training induced hypertrophy, and found that doing cold water immersion immediately following resistance training may have a negative effect on hypertrophy, but more research is definitely needed. And it is even highlighted on the paper that given the very low quality of the studies examined, the results of the study should be interpreted with some caution. But as it stands, we don't have any solid evidence hinting on positive effects. So they are hinting on negative effects, which is, not the best point pro cold water immersion. So the idea that, jumping in a cold shower or an ice bath post training, it is not really grounded on much. And if anything, there may be a negative effect on muscle growth based on this review and some previous data. So I'm not saying, hey, if you love ice baths and they help you, I don't know, wake up or feel more, ready for the day, or it's a practice that for some reason you enjoy doing, like, this is not going to destroy your gains. Keep in mind, like, and there may be applications for them as well. Let's say you're an athlete and you have a game coming up and you want to decrease inflammation, and you don't really care if you impact the hypertrophic response from that one workout by a tiny bit. Because keep in mind, like, you'd have to be legit ice bathing after every workout for like long periods of time to really destroy your gains. So not even destroy, to really negatively affect your gains. But yeah, exactly. So let's say you're, like we said, rugby before. Let's say you're a rugby athlete and you had a very hard leg workout, an SNC workout, and your legs are extremely sore, and you have a match coming up on a Saturday, and you had that workout on a Thursday. It may help for you to take a few ice baths in between to sort of allow you to feel less discomfort, less soreness, and let some of that inflammation dissipate. Yes, in theory, you are negatively, in quotation marks, affecting some of the hypertrophic responses to that workout. But it may be more important for you to, get 96% of whatever gains you're getting and feel less sore so you can perform at the game versus caring that much about whether hypertrophy is optimized. But yeah, overall, if you like ice baths, just don't feel like you have to do them post workout, as you're probably not getting much from them, and do them whenever you like, and be cautious with how much you ice bath. Don't lose your mind.
Absolutely. I was surprised that they managed to do so long in the ice bath, I think, or in the cold water. I saw that it was most of the studies were 20 minutes. For me, that sounds incredible. I don't think I could do that. But well done to those study participants, I guess.
Yeah, it's the same with like other studies that you see the methods and you're like, whoa, that's crazy. But yeah, that's why they're studies and they're not, they're designed to look sometimes at the more extreme side of things. But I've heard of people doing more than, I guess.
They've got lots of time clearly in their days. That's good. Good for them. Oh, do you think that sauna and steam room and the inverse, like the, I guess, or the opposite, heat would be beneficial?
I'm not I'm not insanely confident in my knowledge in those areas, but from the little bit that I know, I think I can confidently say that I know that there's no, magic sort of effect on muscle growth or an insanely negative effect of muscle growth. I know that there may be a net benefit in some cases, or the opposite. But similarly to cold water immersion, we're not talking about a make or break sort of effect, but definitely nothing that you should be going out of your way to include, if unless again you're an athlete that is working, that is training multiple times, sometimes multiple times per day, and doing all sorts of sessions, and you have those are the scenarios where these things, I'd say, play a role. For the average lifter who's just trying to get bigger and stronger, just as long as you're sleeping 6 to 8 hours a day, and you're getting your protein in, and you're eating healthy, it's unlikely that these practices are going to make an insane difference to anything.
Absolutely. And on that note of sleeping, check out episode 7 and 8 with the sleep consultant Riley Jarvis. Just thought I'd add that in there.
Hey.
Okay, and then yeah, that's really cool. He's amazing. He's a biohacker and sleep and optimizing and everything. So to finish off, if you were traveling on a spaceship to Mars and wanted to maintain muscle size, what 10 exercises or pieces of equipment would you choose to take with you? It can be any machine or exercise, but you have limited space. It's arbitrary, I know, and it's Mars, so everything would be different, I get you. But if you can only take 10 exercises, can you give the exercise name, the kind of grip width or like grip that you'd use, and then the bar type? Let's go 10 exercises to maintain Dr. Pak.
Yeah, for sure. Let's remove Mars and say cruise. Let's say cruise ship. So gravity.
Oh, brilliant. I just thought Mars would be cool because it's so different, but sure, they have 2 crews.
So I would definitely have a barbell, because that then allows me to do a bunch of stuff easily. Some form of cable pulley system, because then I can do a bunch of other stuff, and that's all the equipment I would need. As far as exercises go, so you've provided me with a table, and I'll just, off the back of that, I'm going to tell you what I think I would have. So I would definitely be doing some form of deadlifting for my hamstrings, lower back, erectors, glutes, and it would probably be a Romanian deadlift, just because that includes a bit more length and work at the hamstrings, and you have to control the eccentric, which you often completely skip on like competition style deadlifts. Keep in mind the pulley system that I mentioned will also have like a pull-up bar. I would do I would do a strict overhead press for shoulders, deficit push-ups for chest, squats. I personally like low bar squats, but I would do those, including some form of, I wouldn't bother that much with like sissy squats or anything else, because we're talking about, hey, you're on a ship, you're trying your best to make do with whatever you have. Just squats would do. Same goes for my hamstrings. Just deadlifts would be fine. So we have deadlifts, squats, strict overhead press, deficit push-ups. Then I would do a Bayesian curl on the pulley system. I would do an overhead cable tricep extension on the pulley system, and behind the back cable lateral raise again on the pulley system, an ab cable crunch on the pulley system, a deficit barbell row, not on the pulley system, and some form of pull down on the pulley system, either single arm or if I had the option to have like an actual bar, I would do like a proper lat pull down on there, even if I had to sit on the floor and just probably with a reverse grip. But I think that would not only allow me to maintain, I think that would make for a pretty not complete
gain.
Yeah, solid gain. Like you're obviously missing like a couple of exercises for like hamstrings and quads, so you get that rectus femoris sort of growth, and you work the hamstring differently as well with the curl. But overall, with these exercises, I'd be not just covered, but more than covered. Keep in mind, I'd need a rack for that bar in order for some of those to work as well.
You've got all of that. So I missed after overhead extension, so Bayesian curls, overhead extension. Then the next thing I got was ab cable crunch and barbell row pull down. What was after overhead extension? Do you remember?
Behind the back lateral raises.
That's the one.
Yeah. So it would be squat, deadlift, OHP, and OHP is because I love OHP. Deficit push-ups, I think, are a great underrated exercise for chest development. And I don't genetic.
Yeah, then Bayesian. Yeah.
Bayesian curls, some form of lat pull down, and then barbell rows, deficit barbell rows, overhead tricep extensions, and I added the direct ab work as well, because that's been a thing lately.
So on the ab cable crunch, are you supposed to be facing the machine or away from the machine?
I'm not sure about supposed. I personally face the machine.
Which is better? Okay.
It depends on the on how the pulley, I guess, is made, and if it's a good quality one, or if it's pulling you against it. But I guess facing against it, maybe, I don't know, if it's pulling you back and you have to resist it, it may make it a bit less easy to focus on the exercise. But again, minor detail. I'd say try both sides, whatever feels best, as long as, again, you can get a nice stretch and go close to failure,
Absolutely. No, I totally get you. And do you feel like on the ab, do you just hang on to it, or how do you do that?
I usually use a rope. I make sure to, get a nice stretch, flex my spine, and that's about it. Go to the point where I can't do any more partial reps, and then I call it a day. But it's the, ab training is a bit weird, because people treat it as if it's like this different thing, where it's like, same way you train your biceps, you gotta, if you want ab hypertrophy, sure. The same way if you're doing a bunch of, it's not even the same way. Yes, sure, you'll get some core development from all the isometric work that may be going on when you deadlift and squat heavy. But it's, you gotta actually target the muscle as you would with any other muscle,
Going to failure, 2 to 8 seconds, all of that stuff.
Yes.
Keep it simple. So, closing thoughts. What advice or parting words of wisdom do you have for our listeners who are looking to embark on their own journey of lifting and muscle growth?
Yeah, look, it's not that deep. As long as you develop, it's useful to develop a certain etiquette when it comes to training and keeping things quote unquote strict, or borrowing a bit from the optimization crowd, and going in and being like, okay, I'm doing this lat pull down, I'm not gonna effing jerk the weight like an absolute loser, and not pay any attention to the form or the muscle involved. But at the same time, there comes a sweet spot where, you are keeping things relatively strict, but at the same time, you're not there worrying constantly about whether what you're doing is optimal. In the reality of things, muscle growth takes time. It requires consistent, hard effort, consistent amounts of high effort in the gym. Whether you did a single arm pull down across the body or a regular lat pull down, in the grand scheme of things, I believe is not going to make a big difference. And anecdotally, from looking at people, we've seen people develop all sorts of muscular physiques over the years, even when less equipment was available, even when optimization was not so much of a thing, even where more bro science was out there and people were doing things that we know are wrong, and we're doing like short length partials, for example, doing 21s and all sorts of BS. People were still training very hard, performing, multiple exercises per muscle group, going to failure or very close to failure, doing multiple sets per muscle group per week, and they saw amazing growth. It's cool to geek out, and it's cool to want to know more about, how you can potentially get that extra bit of growth out of each exercise. But for the love of God, pick a few exercises per muscle group. Obviously, don't go out of your way to pick the worst exercise known in history.
Oh,
But even that's hard to do. I would
you want to do it.
Yeah, I would even argue that, bro, if you go to a gym and you pick 2 machines per muscle group and not open a book or read anything about exercise science or about hypertrophy, and just make sure that over the years you're doing more weight and more reps and you're pushing yourself hard on those machines while obviously eating and sleeping, you're still going to see massive amounts of muscle growth. It just takes time. So enjoy the journey, fucking fall in love with the process, have fun with your friends, have those YOLO sessions as well with the lads where you all go there and do a bunch of random stuff. Don't lose your mind over the minor details. Geek out if you like to, but always remember that, hey, engaging in high intensity of effort resistance training is for long periods of time is where it's at. It's not, the details are not that important.
Absolutely. Using science as a base and then effort as the key ingredient is the way to go.
Exactly. Nice.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Goodbye, Gains Gurus. Thank you for listening, and see you on the next episode of TMGP.